For a while now, the internet has been home to a pretty quirky phenomenon, analog horror. The main premise being, what if this spooky thing took place 30 to 40 years ago with poor camera quality and this specific font? I'm not kidding when I say that this font has been used so many times it now activates my fight or flight because an entity in the moon might be trying to kill me. I'm not trying to say that analog horror or found footage is a new concept or anything. I mean, just by looking up found footage online, you get movies like The Blair Witch Project or The Visit. On the internet too, things like Local 58 have been ongoing since 2015. Jeez, I feel old. All of this to establish that this phenomenon of having poor audio quality and shaking cameras is not a new concept. However, I feel that with the turn of the latest decade, it's brought with it a renaissance of sorts for analog horror, with both ongoing projects and newer ones being praised and popularized in all internet spaces like TikTok, Reddit, and Friday Night Funkin' mods. While on a surface level it may seem like the market is growing oversaturated and people are just becoming lazy with this content, as seen with other popular horror subgenres on the internet, analog horror creators generally have some integrity and make content primarily to entertain, but profiting from it is probably not a bad thing either. A lot of these, like Vita Carnis, The Oldest View, Greylock Tapes, are passion projects full of talented artists, voice actors, writers, etc. who make genuinely creepy pieces of media that should really be examined for all the work put into them. Now, most of these horrors beyond human comprehension can be found on YouTube, and while they have some elements that go beyond YouTube into other websites, because come on, can you really be a successful artist if you don't have an overly cryptic ARG that some 4chan user will solve in a day? If you ever feel unsafe, you can just pause the videos and the horrors will end. Which is why in today's video, I want to talk about the games that have spawned from analog horror. Horror games Let's Plays have made for some of the most popular types of videos here on YouTube, and for a while you could make a living from just screaming when a PNG jumped at you with a loud sound. While nowadays people have moved on from 4-hour-long unedited playthroughs of 5 evenings at Adam Sandler's, horror games are still very important on the gaming side of YouTube. The game I want to talk about today is a part of the Lancaster League series, a group of games that started production in summer 2023 by Jeremy Fisher. So far, only 3 parts have been released, these being the O'Brien State Park, Crisis at Call Center, and an Entity Exam. These games aren't Jeremy's first attempts at making games, as he has made the game House Sitter, which is a half-decent survival horror game in a closed environment. If anything, it reminds me of that one challenge room in the Funhouse of Danganronpa 2. Yep, that's it. Clap it up, guys. Clap it up. I've made a Danganronpa 2 reference. Thank you, like and subscribe. These games are all free on Steam and don't take up too much space, so if you're looking for a quick game to play with a decent story, Jeremy Fisher games are the way to go. Now, I could talk about all 3 in a comprehensive video because all 3 games are different enough to warrant a video of their own, but today, I really want to focus on the Entity Exam. Not only is this the best one in terms of fear factor, but it's also the most immersive one in my opinion. This Steam review sums up the games perfectly. I do have some gripes with the game though, as there is some missed potential, but considering this is only the 3rd entry, I have faith that this project will be able to go somewhere. Additionally, I just want to disclose that certain images used in this game are actually AI generated, which I do have some issues with, but it's not the main selling point of the game, and it's clearly stated in the Steam description, so it doesn't feel as scummy as Twitter AI art. I am aware a lot of the elements of this game have been seen in other analog horror series, but you have to understand that at some point you can only create so many new concepts until you start mixing things up. But you know what? At least this game doesn't obviously copy from people like Alex Kister by calling the humanoid creatures alternates. All of this to say that this game has some flaws, and they will be brought up in due time. I don't want to say that it's irredeemable though, as there are some aspects of this game that are really well executed. With all of that out of the way, let's get on to the game itself. You start up the game and it presents you with a main menu in the style of an old VHS tape, complete with slight fisheye television. You have the option to start the game, eject the tape, or even join the Discord. This is truly like 1988. Assuming you do choose to start the game as it's expected, you're met with some expository text talking about how this is a tape that we should be familiar with, considering it's a screen recording of one of our old training protocols. There is a loose overarching story between the tapes, but for this game, I really do like how you're left in the dark for the most of the experience. You're drip-fed information at certain points, but for the most part, you're left to make up your own narrative based off the little details you might pick up left and right. The vague threats end, and we get introduced to the main company of the story, the Entity Research Department, or ERD for short. Look, I'll say it straight away, the name is slightly generic. ERD does sound like something you'd see in literally any other analog horror. Referring to something as an entity is incredibly cliche at this point, which could be seen as a sign of laziness, But at the same time,
Got it there.
you can only include so many variations on the word creature until it starts blurring together. It's that whole thing of you can copy online, but you have to make it more personal to you and not completely plagiarize. That's one of the problems with analog horror and horror in general. At some points you just reuse the same tropes without really considering why they were good in the first place, and sure, individuals can choose to spin these tropes in their own way, and for the most part analog horror, at least good ones, have managed to avoid falling into the trap of being predictable because the teams behind each product are also creative. But going forward, I fear that the state of analog horror might become similar to mainstream horror movies scene, in which anything can be made into a terrible feature-length movie if you have connections, or just look at mascot horror in general. Starting the game, you have to input your ERD username and password, because here you assume the role of one of their trusted employees. After using my real name of Jeff and inputting my password, I was met with this really cool overlay featuring 6 different components regarding entities and an inaccessible final exam. I really like how desolate this whole screen feels. Normally in games, a main menu is supposed to find a balance of being clear while also retaining some personality to make it different from others, but here the menu really focuses on being clear, leaving only the essential information with a subtitle for each test section, some icons, temperature and American numbers, your username, plus the date and time. What I want to point out is that here you're taking this exam at 5 AM, which in and of itself is slightly bizarre because these work hours would make no sense in real life, but also the time moves according to real time, so it helps so much with the immersion despite having such a simple overlay. While it would be cool to have the date match your computer's date minus the year to help with immersion even more, this time at the bottom does help with immersion because you're doing this in real time and not game time. So earlier I mentioned there being some components on the screen which are all accessible from the start, with the exception of one being the comprehensive exam. This separation of information into 6 parts really helps with world building, as every one of them is focused on one aspect of this alternate reality, whether it be the appearances of these entities, the sounds they could possibly make, situations where you're faced with these entities, etc. The whole premise of this being revision for a test is also interesting because it strikes a decent balance of those text-to-speech IB Biology HL revision videos and Men in Black field training videos. This game does feature 1 or 2 jump scares, and while they are predictable, as most are, I do like how each little revision module does let on enough to give you an idea on what you may encounter when taking them on, while also being vague enough to the point where it's not a comprehensive spoiler. Speaking of the modules, let's get onto them and what they entail, because this is going to be the main body of the video. Assuming this is the first one you choose, phase detection is what you'd expect when you think of analog horror, because it's obviously very inspired by things like the Mandela catalog. Before starting the Face Raiders game, you get a bit of exposition from the ERD telling you that entities who possess human characteristics are the most violent, deceptive, and are the greatest threat to public security, which is why it's important that you as an agent are able to identify the threats ASAP. I really like the statistics they show when talking about the effects of succeeding in this module, because while the fatality rate decreased to 26 out of 100 is still huge, which does help instill some dread into the player, because a quarter of encounters with these humanoid entities end incredibly poorly. It tells you that you have some time to click on a face in each image when you see it, and that distractions may be employed. Man, I sure hope a horror beyond human comprehension doesn't appear. So this module is just 19 questions of you rapidly clicking on these images that get progressively more abstract and dark, to the point that sometimes I was surprised I was even clicking on a face, because you can't tell me that this burning pile of flesh is a face. I refuse to believe that. I should add that this game, like all horror games, should be played alone in a dark room at night, because otherwise it's just not fun. The game also recommends headphones to immerse yourself better, and I agree with this. There's like one loud sound for a jump scare in this module, and it's not the highlight because, let's face it, they are truly cheap thrills. I don't think this module is the best one, mostly because it's not necessarily scary, just unnerving. I think the best part of this first component was the expository text at the start, if I'm being honest, because it allows for some world building and lets the player create scenarios in their head instead of showing some found footage video with white-faced jump scare at the end. The images themselves were somewhat uncomfortable, and the jump scare was just there, and I don't know if at this point I'm just desensitized to these red vine like people do to Vita Carnis, but analog horror I don't think is meant to be downright terrifying with its content. It's just meant to lay the seeds for a terrifying universe and let the consumer interact with that world in their own way. Lancaster Lake manages to do that pretty well, plus at this point you don't really know what happens if you fail the exam, so you want to avoid that at all costs, especially when you know that this game can have access to your webcam and all. I reckon that's about it for the first module, so now let's get on to my favorite module of them all. So this module works slightly differently to most of the ones here because instead of playing Spot the Difference, you actually have to read. The purpose of this module is to enforce that ERD rules have to be followed at all costs. You're then introduced to this incredibly important acronym, srT. This acronym standing for Calmly Collect Evidence, Eliminate Threats, Run Away, and game end yourself. So I guess it's srT now. These actions are to be used in encounters with entities, and here the questionnaire has you choose between these options in response to specific situations. Make the right choice, or you may end up like these case studies presented here and here. You also learn of a few do's and don'ts, really making it feel like IB biology revision, and you get a final reminder that following mission protocol is imperative, as deviation will lead to termination from ERD themselves if you aren't already game ended by the entities for your foolish behavior. Another case study is shown in which an agent chose love over the job, leading to both of their terminations, which really just cements how unforgiving the world and company is. Empathy is frowned upon, and you're expected to just let it be if your loved ones are in danger, which really helps the player feel even more dread at this point. I also like the detail that this is a refresher telling us that this is just surface level information, making you question what could be hiding underneath. This game tells you that you won't be reminded about these topics, which means that you just have to accept this morally dubious info and move on to the test itself. This test is a lot shorter than the others, probably because if they were more than 10 reading questions, the game would have no players. But I do think that the questions are really good at their job of keeping the players in the dark while also drip feeding them enough information about the ERD to make them want to keep playing. So for 5 questions, you roleplay a Sigma male who puts his career before anything else, and hopefully you pass because you are literate. I really do like this section because it relies less on the images themselves to make you unsettled, and more just letting you know about the cold and heartless world this game is set in. Images in this game are created by AI, which I guess takes away from the craft, but at the same time, I don't think the entities are the real focus here. While the exam is supposedly all about them, this game has a stronger focus on the ERD itself and just how nihilistic everything is in that universe. The focus seems to be more on the world itself rather than the inhabitants, if that makes sense. The module is really good at conveying just how screwed you are if you live there, while not being in your face with loud sounds or rapidly zooming PNGs, so you know what, good on you, Lancaster Lake. This is actually a really good module. It just kind of sucks that it's also the shortest one. I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about this one in between playing the game and writing the script. This is probably where the Mandela catalog influence is the most apparent, as you quite literally have to spot the intruder out of 4 images. This one tells you that entities have some abnormal features, whether it be loose skin, missing features, or incorrect features in general. Look, you've seen this song and dance many times already. You have to click on the doppelganger among the humans. They're harder to notice sometimes, but they're usually pretty easy to spot. The main highlights here are that one question where there are 4 doppelgangers and you're supposed to fail every time, which could be intentionally leading you to questioning why the ERD rigs certain questions, and this entity. This game has showed multiple unnerving creations, but this Celine Delgado image lookalike was probably what got me the most. Something about it just really seemed off. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say about this specific module though, because it's quite literally just the Mandela catalog, except once again, you have that added pressure of potentially failing the exam. I think the main highlight here is the rig question because it leaves you with more questions than answers, and that's one of the main things this game has going for it. This module is supposed to help test ERD members' reaction times, as here they have to determine if the things shown in the images can be classified as a threat or not a threat. Similar to the previous module, this one is something of a nothing burger, with the main pressure being the time constraint and the fact that some images take longer to appear. The entities aren't necessarily scary because you're half expecting them at this point, but I do like the images in which you're shown these dimly lit rooms and click the threat option even though you're alone there. Pareidolia is used really well here because you're half expecting to be jump scared with every single image, especially with how the loud whirring sound cuts sometimes only to edge you as you're shown an image of a rubber duck or something. You aren't given much exposition about the universe this game is set in either though, so I can't really rate this module too high. The loud whirring sound is a nice addition, especially when it fakes leading to a jump scare. Subversions like that are exactly why horror games are still fun to play to this day. Look, I'm sorry, this module and the previous one are not really good. Like, there's not much going on. It's just your typical analog horror situation, except this time it's in a game. There's not really much world building or anything going on. It's just like, is this image scary? Is this image not scary? So, with that all out the way, let's get on to the next module, the
audio transcription.
This is where the headphones come in handy because you have to transcribe audio coming from these quote-unquote unusual sources. A lot of the audio is garbled and confusing, which could penalize your test results, so this is the one where you have to lock in. Before starting, the higher-ups tell you that documenting what entities say during encounters is the #1 priority, which once again dehumanizes all ERD workers in a way that I really enjoy reading about. I think that the whole treating ERD workers as expendable trash really helps sell the hopelessness of this universe, and I'm glad to see that they're leaning more into that again. This is your typical analog horror cries for help that you know and love. The audio quality isn't the best, but at least approximations are seen as correct, so you aren't completely done for if you don't type the exact thing. Also, some of the messages said are genuinely unnerving, which is what I came here for, feeling as if I wasn't completely alone in my room on a Friday night. I also just want to say that I now despise these entities for speaking to me as if they were low-tier god. They had no right to go for the jugular like that. There are a total of 18 questions, and as you can see, I barely passed. Yeah, gameplay wise this isn't the best one because the audio quality, as said previously, isn't that good, but at least it made me feel very uncomfortable, more than just seeing AI generated images of flesh monsters. Overall, this module really played like ass, the audio quality wasn't that good, yet it still made me more unnerved than anything else I'd seen previously. Yes, even Celine Delgado. I think there's something inherently more scary about having audio than video in analog horror because it really leaves it up to the viewer's interpretation to, decide what's making that sound. And, that's probably a lot better than just whiteface. That's pretty much all there is about this module, so let's get on to the final revision session before the final comprehensive exam. This is by far the longest module here, as a text-to-speech voice will go over the various types of entities and what they do. Before that though, you get very limited information regarding the origins of entities, but you do know that encounters are much more common now than 1,000 years ago in a similar fashion to quirks from My Hero Academia. The ERD was apparently founded in part to research entities and protect the public, but mostly to find utility in them and discover their origins. So yeah, the R in ERD is not to be glossed over. Apparently entities are from the back doors, which yeah, I'll let you make the connection. Look, there are highs and lows in this game. Your main job as an agent is to explore the gain of function of entities and finding out their origins, and as of 1992, there are 4 main types of entities that the ERD is focusing on. These being the Shadow People, Matronics, Skinwalkers, and the Rake. These entities are classified by 3 criteria: threat level, containment, utility. A text-to-speech voice gives you some details about each entity in addition to basic information shown on screen. I didn't know I was supposed to actually remember what the voice was saying, so this module is the only one I failed. To anyone who's wondering what happens when you fail a module, nothing. At least, I don't think so. I was just able to move on to the final exam, so it was fine. But yes, once again, the images themselves aren't that bad. It's more of what the text-to-speech says that should be examined more closely. For example, shadow people stalk their prey for a few years before killing them. Once it starts, it's over for you, so good luck trying to summon the Hatman next time, sucker. Animatronics aren't actually a threat to adults because they only prey on children. Look, there's an easy joke to be made here, but I'm not going to give you the satisfaction, so I'm going to let your imagination run wild with this one. Doppelgangers / skinwalkers are just your typical alternates, and I guess we finally have the Rake, who is my favorite type of entity because it's literally just a creepypasta in real life. I like the small detail that the Rake started appearing only after the Wendigo was neutralized, which not only shows the power of the ERD, but also tells you that if an entity goes extinct, there's probably something worse coming out there. So all you're left to do as a human is to sit and pray that you don't die because of one of these entities. You have no chance of making it out alive of that world, which really helps establish how awful that world is. You answered 10 questions based on all of the lore you've answered, and yeah, I'm not afraid to admit it, I messed up on this one. Nothing happened though, and I was just able to access the comprehensive exam afterwards, probably because Lancaster is a place in Pennsylvania. Unless I checked, Pennsylvania can't actually move to the place where I am currently. Before I move on, I just want to point out that this threat is spelt wrong. I don't know if it's intentional, it might be considering it happens multiple times and threat is spelled correctly other times. I'm not going to make a deep dive into it though because, I'm not part of the game theory, so you can give up on that. You can literally play the game afterwards. It's free, it's small, it's short. Yeah, go play Lancaster League. The final exam is really just a repeat of everything else you've done. There's not really any new information given about the ERD or anything. After 26 questions, you're done with this exam, and you're told to go to your supervisor for next instructions, but that's cut short because your webcam is then used to tell you that you need to stop watching before they find you, and the game abruptly ends. With that, credits roll, and you're sent back to the menu where the Discord is present. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this game is the best one I've ever played, because it isn't. As stated before, this game has highs and lows. It definitely shares content with a lot of other franchises in the analog horror genre, and somewhat includes the tropes we've all grown tired of. But I feel that Lancaster League Entity Exam excels at world building, and just generally keeping you on your toes because of the format of the game. While yes, it's a free Steam game that usually takes around 30 minutes to complete, so you probably won't find the meaning of life after one playthrough, it serves its purpose as a form of entertainment, as for those 30 minutes I was constantly thinking of what the inhabitants of this world face every day. This is one of those games where I think you get back what you put in. If you're willing to immerse yourself in this game, for example by actually putting on headphones and turning off the lights, you might actually be unnerved throughout the entire playthrough. What you see on screen helps to scare you, but I think that the game shines in how it lets the player interpret every piece of information given. Because we know so little about the ERD, everything we learn about them just feels so important, but it also lets us understand just how little we know about this world too, because at every moment information is withheld from us, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I really like how this game keeps you in the dark and ends so abruptly in a somewhat unexpected way. Yeah, some parts are unintentionally funny, but that's pretty much all horror media. AI is used, but I don't think it takes anything away from the experience, as you're not just staring at this one entity for the whole game. This isn't FNAF. I really hope that Jeremy Fisher really tries to lean more into the world building aspect of Lancaster League for the next game, without revealing too much either, because when he's not trying to make browser games for the Mandela catalog, he's actually really competent. I think that's about it. With that, I thank you for watching, like and subscribe for more life-changing content, and goodbye.